The story begins on a stormy night in Maplewood, a small town in rural America. Rain pounds against the streets as Officer Claire Bennett finishes her shift at the local police station. Just as she's about to lock up, there's a faint knock at the door. She opens it to find a disheveled teenage boy collapsed on the steps. His face is gaunt, his hair matted, and his clothes are little more than rags. He looks far older than his apparent age, his body ravaged by years of neglect. "Help me," he whispers hoarsely. "I've been locked in my basement for 12 years." Claire pulls him inside, stunned. She wraps him in a blanket and calls for medical assistance, her mind racing. 12 years? How could someone be held captive for so long without anyone noticing? As the boy, introduced as Ethan Carter, regains some strength, he starts recounting his harrowing tale. Born into what seemed like a perfect family, Ethan says his parents, Richard and Margaret Carter, were respected members of the community. But when he was 6 years old, everything changed. "They told everyone I was sick," Ethan says, his voice trembling. "They said I was institutionalized because I couldn't function in society, but it was all a lie." Ethan explains that instead of sending him away, his parents locked him in their basement. For 12 years, he lived in isolation, surviving on scraps of food and water from a leaking pipe. The basement became his prison, a place where no one could hear his cries for help. But the most chilling part of his story comes when Claire asks why they kept him hidden. "They didn't want me talking," Ethan says, his eyes wide with fear, "about what I know." By morning, news of Ethan's escape spreads through Maplewood like wildfire. The Carters were beloved figures in the community, churchgoers, philanthropists, and trusted neighbors. To think they had been hiding such a monstrous secret shakes the town to its core. Richard and Margaret Carter are quickly arrested, but they deny the allegations. Their lawyer argues that Ethan is mentally unstable and fabricated the story due to trauma. However, photos of the squalid basement and Ethan's emaciated body paint a damning picture. Public outrage grows as people demand answers. Meanwhile, Ethan struggles to adjust to life outside captivity. Years of malnutrition and isolation have left him physically weak and emotionally fragile. Yet despite his condition, he insists there's more to his story and that the truth will change everything. The case is handed over to Detective Clara Hayes, a seasoned investigator known for her relentless pursuit of the truth. With a reputation for solving complex cases, Clara dives headfirst into Ethan's story. Her first step is to verify the Carters' claims about institutionalizing their son. After combing through medical records and contacting psychiatric facilities across the state, Clara finds no evidence that an Ethan Carter was ever admitted anywhere. The trail goes cold. There's simply no record of him existing outside Maplewood until his escape. Clara then interviews neighbors and friends of the Carters. Many recall seeing Ethan briefly as a child, but remember being told by Richard and Margaret that he had severe behavioral issues and needed to be kept isolated for everyone's safety. Over time, people stopped asking questions, accepting the Carters' explanations without scrutiny. Something doesn't sit right with Clara. Why would a family so deeply embedded in the community go to such lengths to hide their own son? And what could possibly justify locking him away for 12 years? Ethan, still recovering from years of neglect, begins sharing more details about his life in the basement. His memories are fragmented, but they paint a horrifying picture. He was given just enough food and water to survive, often going days without either. A small television mounted high on the wall became his only connection to the outside world. It played news channels 24/7, looping stories about politics, scandals, and global events. Every evening, his father would descend into the basement, bringing trays of food, or sometimes nothing at all. Richard would whisper ominous warnings, "If you ever tell anyone, it will destroy everything." Ethan also recalls hearing muffled voices upstairs late at night. Men in suits would visit the house frequently, speaking in hushed tones with his parents. Though he couldn't make out much, certain phrases stuck with him. "Operation Silent Dawn," "The package is secure," and "We can't afford mistakes." When Clara presses him about these phrases, Ethan admits he has no idea what they mean, but he's certain they're connected to why he was in prison. Armed with a search warrant, Clara leads a team to the Carter home. On the surface, the house appears ordinary, a pristine Victorian estate filled with antiques and family photos. But something feels off. While inspecting the basement where Ethan was held, Clara notices faint cracks along one of the walls. Using a crowbar, she pries open a false panel, revealing a hidden room. Inside, the air is musty, and the space is crammed with boxes, files, and strange artifacts. Among the items Clara discovers, stacks of documents, bank statements showing large transfers to offshore accounts, contracts bearing unfamiliar seals, and handwritten notes referencing names of prominent politicians and business leaders. Old photographs, pictures of Richard and Margaret posing with individuals who look out of place in Maplewood, men in dark suits, some wearing military insignias or corporate badges, maps marked with symbols, detailed maps of the United States dotted with symbols resembling targets and coded labels like Node 7 and Phase 3 complete. Surveillance equipment, cameras, recording devices, and hard drives labeled with dates spanning over a decade. As Clara sifts through the evidence, one thing becomes clear. The Carters weren't just abusive parents. They were involved in something far bigger and darker than anyone could have imagined. Back at the station, Clara pores over the materials recovered from the hidden room. She begins piecing together fragments of information. The bank records suggest money laundering on a massive scale, funneling funds between corporations, nonprofits, and government agencies. The photographs imply connections to powerful figures, hinting at a network operating behind the scenes. The maps and symbols seem to outline some kind of operation, perhaps a plan involving multiple locations across the country. But the most disturbing detail comes from a folder marked Project Genesis. Inside, Clara finds blueprints and memos describing a coordinated effort to manipulate public opinion and influence elections. If true, this conspiracy reaches the highest levels of power. Clara realizes that Ethan wasn't just locked away because his parents feared he'd expose their abuse. He was silenced because he might inadvertently reveal their role in a nationwide scheme. As word spreads about the discoveries in the Carter home, Clara starts receiving anonymous threats. Late-night phone calls warn her to drop the investigation. Her superiors urge caution, suggesting she focus on prosecuting the Carters for child endangerment rather than chasing unproven theories of corruption. Even Ethan grows anxious, pleading with Clara to stop digging. "They'll come after you," he says, his voice shaking. "They'll do worse than lock you up." But Clara refuses to back down. This isn't just about justice for Ethan. It's about exposing the rot at the heart of the system. Little does she know, her decision to keep investigating will put both her and Ethan in grave danger. As Clara delves deeper into the evidence from the hidden room, she begins to unravel a dark history tied to the Carter family name. Decades ago, Richard and Margaret's ancestors had inherited vast tracts of land in Maplewood. Land that turned out to be rich in natural resources, including oil and rare minerals. To protect their wealth and secure their status, the Carters struck a secret deal with powerful corporate interests. These corporations exploited the land, wreaking environmental havoc while ensuring the Carters received a steady stream of profits. But there was a catch. Anyone who stood in their way had to disappear. Clara discovers records of forced evictions, where families living near the Carter property were intimidated or bribed into leaving. Those who resisted faced even grimmer fates: mysterious fires, sudden relocations, and unexplained disappearances. The Carters became enforcers for the corporations, silencing opposition and covering up crimes. But it doesn't stop there. As Clara connects more dots, she realizes the Carters' role expanded over time. They weren't just pawns, they became key players in a shadowy network manipulating local economies, politics, and communities. And Ethan? He was collateral damage, locked away because he might have exposed their secrets. Ethan's fragmented memories start making sense as Clara shares her findings with him. When he was 6 years old, his parents brought him along to meetings with corporate executives and government officials. At first, they likely thought nothing of it. He was just a quiet child tagging along. But one fateful day, Ethan overheard something critical. They talked about Operation Silent Dawn, Ethan recalls, his voice trembling. They said people would die if things went wrong. What Ethan heard wasn't just idle talk. It was a blueprint for corruption on a massive scale. The operation involved rigging elections, suppressing dissent, and consolidating power through fear and manipulation. His parents realized too late that Ethan understood more than he should have. To protect their position and the conspiracy they'd helped build, they decided to silence him permanently by locking him away. For 12 years, Ethan remained trapped, his knowledge buried alongside him. Until now. With mounting evidence, Clara leaks parts of the story to trusted journalist Marcus Reed, who publishes an explosive exposé. The article sends shockwaves across the nation, drawing attention not only to Maplewood, but also to the larger web of corruption linked to the Carters. Protesters gather outside courthouses, demanding accountability. Politicians scramble to distance themselves from the scandal. Meanwhile, Clara uncovers another chilling detail. Project Genesis, mentioned in the documents, wasn't just about controlling elections. It was a plan to reshape entire regions under corporate control. Maps marked with symbols reveal sites targeted for resource extraction, displacement of populations, and environmental destruction. The Carters' land was ground zero for this operation. As the investigation unfolds, arrests are made, not just of low-level operatives, but of high-ranking officials implicated in the conspiracy. Corporations once considered untouchable face lawsuits and public backlash. It becomes clear that the Carters were small cogs in a much larger machine, but cogs that held crucial pieces of the puzzle. The trial of Richard and Margaret Carter captivates the nation. Prosecutors present overwhelming evidence of their involvement in illegal activities, including child imprisonment, money laundering, and complicity in human rights abuses. Witnesses come forward, corroborating Ethan's story and detailing other atrocities committed by the Carters and their associates. In a dramatic moment, Ethan takes the stand. Though visibly shaken, he recounts his years of captivity and accuses his parents of using him as leverage in their criminal dealings. The courtroom erupts in gasps as jurors hear his testimony. Ultimately, Richard and Margaret Carter are found guilty on multiple charges and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Dozens of others tied to the conspiracy are arrested, exposing layers of corruption that reach the highest echelons of power. Yet questions linger. How deep does the conspiracy go? Are all those responsible truly being held accountable, or are some still operating in the shadows? Months later, Maplewood begins to heal. The town is forever changed, its idyllic facade shattered, but replaced by a newfound determination to fight injustice. For Ethan, freedom remains bittersweet. Physically frail and emotionally scarred, he moves to a quiet coastal town under a new identity, hoping to rebuild his life. Clara continues her work, inspired by Ethan's courage. She knows the fight against corruption isn't over, but for now she takes solace in knowing that the truth prevailed. On a rainy evening, Ethan stands on the beach, watching waves crash against the shore. Behind him lies a past filled with pain, ahead an uncertain future. But for the first time in 12 years, he feels free, and somewhere, in the depths of the system, the remaining threads of the conspiracy lie dormant, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Ethan reveals the moment that changed his life forever. At just 6 years old, curious and unaware of the danger lurking in his own home, he stumbled upon a hidden trove of secrets while exploring the attic. Among dusty boxes and forgotten heirlooms, he found incriminating files, documents detailing bribes, payoffs, illegal land grabs, and even murders orchestrated by his own family. These weren't just papers, Ethan says, his voice trembling with anger and fear. They were proof of everything they'd done, everything they were planning. Unbeknownst to young Ethan, his discovery was witnessed by his father, who had been watching silently from the shadows. Fearing exposure but unwilling to kill their own son, Richard and Margaret made a chilling decision. They would silence him permanently, not through violence but by erasing him from the world. They fabricated stories about Ethan's mental instability and institutionalization, convincing neighbors and friends to look the other way as they locked him away in the basement. For 12 long years, Ethan remained trapped, his knowledge buried alongside him, until now. When Clara asked why Ethan chose this particular moment to escape, he explains what pushed him over the edge. One night, while lying awake in the cold, damp basement, He overheard his father speaking on the phone upstairs. "They're moving me," Ethan whispers, his eyes wide with panic. "Dad said it wasn't safe anymore. He talked about taking me somewhere more secure, a place where no one could ever find me." Desperation took hold. Knowing this might be his last chance at freedom, Ethan devised a plan. Over the years, his parents occasionally sent laundry baskets down to the basement with fresh clothes or bedding. Unbeknownst to them, Ethan began smuggling small tools, a screwdriver here, pliers there, hidden inside the folds of fabric. Slowly, painstakingly, he worked on loosening the bolts of an old vent shaft near the ceiling. On the stormy night of his escape, Ethan finally pried the vent open and crawled through the narrow ductwork, emerging into the backyard. Exhausted and terrified, he ran straight to the police station, knowing his time was running out. Clara pieces together the final puzzle. With Ethan's testimony and the evidence recovered from the hidden room, she uncovers the full scope of the Carters' crimes. Decades ago, the Carters struck deals with powerful corporations to exploit natural resources on their land. In exchange for wealth and influence, they became enforcers for these entities, using intimidation, bribery, and violence to eliminate opposition. Their actions devastated neighboring families, displacing communities and covering up environmental disasters caused by unchecked resource extraction. The documents labeled Operation Silent Dawn reveal a far-reaching conspiracy involving rigged elections, suppressed protests, and manipulated public opinion, all designed to consolidate corporate power under the guise of progress. But the most damning revelation comes from the files Ethan discovered as a child. These documents directly implicate not only the Carters, but also high-ranking government officials, corporate executives, and law enforcement officers. It becomes clear that the Carters were both architects and pawns in a system built on greed and corruption. The trial of Richard and Margaret Carter captivates the nation. Prosecutors present overwhelming evidence of their involvement in illegal activities, including child imprisonment, money laundering, and complicity in human rights abuses. Witnesses come forward corroborating Ethan's story and detailing other atrocities committed by the Carters and their associates. In a dramatic moment, Ethan takes the stand. Though visibly shaken, he recounts his years of captivity and accuses his parents of using him as leverage in their criminal dealings. The courtroom erupts in gasps as jurors hear his testimony. Ultimately, Richard and Margaret Carter are found guilty on multiple charges and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Dozens of others tied to the conspiracy are arrested, exposing layers of corruption that reach the highest echelons of power. Yet questions linger. How deep does the conspiracy go? Are all those responsible truly being held accountable, or are some still operating in the shadows? Months later, Maplewood begins to heal. The town has forever changed, its idyllic facade shattered, but replaced by a newfound determination to fight injustice. For Ethan, freedom remains bittersweet. Physically frail and emotionally scarred, he moves to a quiet coastal town under a new identity, hoping to rebuild his life. Clara continues her work, inspired by Ethan's courage. She knows the fight against corruption isn't over, but for now she takes solace in knowing that the truth prevailed. On a rainy evening, Ethan stands on the beach, watching waves crash against the shore. Behind him lies a past filled with pain, ahead an uncertain future. But for the first time in 12 years, he feels free. And somewhere, in the depths of the system, the remaining threads of the conspiracy lie dormant, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. The revelations about the Carters' crimes send shockwaves across the country. What began as a local mystery in Maplewood becomes a national scandal, splashed across headlines and dominating news cycles. The image of Richard and Margaret Carter, once pillars of their community, is shattered, replaced by that of cold, calculating criminals who exploited their wealth and influence to commit unspeakable acts. Public outcry grows louder as details emerge about the scale of the conspiracy. Ordinary citizens are horrified to learn how deeply corruption had infiltrated their institutions, how families like the Carters could operate with impunity for decades. Social media erupts with hashtags like #JusticeForEthan and #ExposeTheTruth, amplifying calls for accountability. Protests erupt outside courthouses, corporate headquarters, and government buildings. People demand answers. How many other Carters exist? Who else has been complicit in these crimes? And why did no one notice or care sooner? The case sparks intense debates about privilege, corruption, and the abuse of power. Pundits and analysts dissect how the Carters managed to maintain their facade for so long, pointing to systemic failures that allowed them to evade scrutiny. Privilege. The Carters' status as wealthy, respected members of society shielded them from suspicion. Neighbors ignored red flags, dismissing Ethan's absence as a private family matter. Critics argue this reflects a broader societal tendency to overlook wrongdoing among the elite. Corruption. The ties between the Carters, corporations, and government officials highlight the dangers of unchecked greed. Many wonder if similar networks exist elsewhere, quietly manipulating systems for personal gain. Abuse of power. The imprisonment of a child, their own son, raises questions about the lengths people will go to protect their secrets. Commentators point out that Ethan's captivity wasn't just an act of cruelty. It was a calculated move to safeguard their position in the conspiracy. Schools, universities, and community groups host discussions about ethics and accountability, using the Carters story as a cautionary tale. For some, it's a wake-up call, a reminder that evil often hides behind polished smiles and manicured lawns. Back in Maplewood, the fallout hits hardest. The town struggles to reconcile its idyllic image with the horrors uncovered in its midst. Friends and neighbors grapple with guilt over not questioning the Carters' lies sooner. Some admit they suspected something was off, but chose to stay silent, afraid of rocking the boat or being ostracized. Local businesses suffer as tourists steer clear of the now infamous town. Churches hold special services to address the moral crisis, urging forgiveness and healing. Yet tensions simmer beneath the surface. Longtime residents accuse outsiders of sensationalizing the tragedy, while younger voices demand transparency and change. One positive outcome emerges. A grassroots movement forms, dedicated to supporting victims of abuse and advocating for systemic reforms. Inspired by Ethan's bravery, volunteers set up hotlines and support groups, vowing to ensure no one suffers in silence again. The Carters' downfall triggers a domino effect. Other families and organizations implicated in Operation Silent Dawn face investigations. Corporations linked to illegal activities see boycotts and lawsuits pile up. Politicians connected to the conspiracy resign in disgrace, their careers ruined. But not everyone is brought to justice. Despite Clara's best efforts, some key players managed to slip through the cracks, powerful figures with resources to cover their tracks. Rumors swirl about offshore accounts, erased evidence, and silenced witnesses. Clara knows the fight isn't over. While significant progress has been made, she understands that rooting out entrenched corruption takes time. She vows to keep pushing, even as public attention begins to wane. Months later, life slowly returns to normal. But nothing feels quite the same. Maplewood is quieter, its once bright charm dimmed by the shadow of what happened. Yet there's also a sense of resilience. The town has faced its darkest hour and survived, emerging stronger, if not entirely healed. Ethan settles into his new life, finding solace in small routines. Though he still struggles with trust and trauma, he starts volunteering at a local shelter, helping others find hope after hardship. His story serves as a beacon of courage, reminding people that even in the depths of despair, freedom is possible. As for Clara, she continues her work, driven by the belief that exposing the truth can spark meaningful change. Late one night, as she reviews files on her desk, she notices a familiar name linked to another case, a thread waiting to be pulled. With a deep breath, she picks up her pen. The battle against corruption may never truly end, but thanks to Ethan and those like him, the world is waking up and fighting back. As the investigation into the Carters deepens, it becomes clear that their crimes were just the tip of a much larger iceberg. The documents recovered from the hidden room, along with Ethan's testimony and Clara's relentless digging, lead authorities to uncover a sprawling corporate conspiracy involving some of the most powerful companies in the nation. Names once synonymous with success and innovation are now tarnished. Executives at these corporations had worked hand in hand with families like the Carters to exploit resources, suppress dissent, and manipulate public policy for decades. Key players include energy giants, real estate developers, pharmaceutical conglomerates, and even tech firms accused of surveillance and data manipulation. The scope of the scandal is staggering: environmental destruction, companies illegally dumped toxic waste, poisoned water supplies, and destroyed ecosystems, all while funneling bribes to silence regulators. Human rights abuses. Thousands of people were displaced or harmed as part of forced evictions and land grabs orchestrated by these corporations. Political manipulation. Campaigns were rigged, elections tampered with, and laws rewritten to serve corporate interests over public welfare. Each revelation shocks the nation further, exposing how deeply entrenched corruption had become in every level of society. The fallout is swift and merciless. Dozens of high-profile executives are arrested, their luxurious lifestyles abruptly dismantled as they're paraded before cameras in handcuffs. Mansions are seized, private jets grounded, and bank accounts frozen. For many, it's the first time they've faced consequences for years, or even decades of unchecked greed. Lawsuits pour in from victims seeking justice, families who lost loved ones to environmental disasters, whistleblowers blacklisted for speaking out, and communities devastated by corporate exploitation all step forward, demanding reparations. Class action lawsuits grow into billions of dollars worth of claims, crippling some of the implicated companies. Yet not everyone pays the price. While mid-level executives and regional managers bear the brunt of the arrests, several top-tier CEOs manage to evade direct charges. Their lawyers argue lack of evidence or claim ignorance of illegal activities carried out under their watch. Critics accuse prosecutors of prioritizing easier targets rather than pursuing the true architects of the conspiracy. Inspired by Ethan's courage, thousands of victims come forward with their own stories of abuse, neglect, and betrayal at the hands of the implicated corporations. Social media platforms overflow with hashtags like #BreakTheSilence and #corporate accountability, amplifying voices that had long been ignored. Stories range from heartbreaking to infuriating. A farmer describes how his family farm was bulldozed overnight after refusing to sell their land to a development company. A single mother recounts being fired from her job after reporting unsafe working conditions, only to discover her employer falsified records to cover up violations. An indigenous activist shares how her community's sacred lands were poisoned by mining operations, leaving them sick and destitute. These testimonies galvanize public outrage, fueling protests and calls for systemic reform. Lawmakers scramble to respond, introducing legislation aimed at increasing transparency, protecting whistleblowers, and holding corporations accountable for wrongdoing. The scandal sends shockwaves through multiple industries, forcing widespread changes. Energy sector. Oil and gas companies face unprecedented scrutiny, leading to stricter regulations on drilling practices and emissions. Some firms declare bankruptcy, unable to withstand the financial burden of lawsuits and fines. Real estate development. Urban planners and activists push back against projects tied to corrupt deals, advocating for sustainable and equitable development instead. Pharmaceuticals. Investigations reveal price gouging schemes and unethical clinical trials, prompting demands for affordable health care and greater oversight of drug approvals. Tech industry. Revelations about data manipulation spark debates about privacy rights and government regulation of technology giants. For the first time in years, there's a sense that accountability might actually be within reach. However, skeptics warn that without sustained pressure, corporations will find new ways to circumvent the rules, and history could repeat itself. Months later, the fight for justice continues. Though significant progress has been made, the road ahead remains long and uncertain. Settlement funds begin flowing to victims, but many say no amount of money can undo the damage done. In Maplewood, the town grapples with its role in the scandal. Once blind neighbors vow never to turn a deaf ear again, pledging support to grassroots movements fighting for transparency and fairness. Clara Hayes earns national recognition for her work, becoming a symbol of perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds. As for Ethan, he finds purpose in sharing his story. He starts speaking at rallies, schools, and conferences, urging others not to stay silent when they see injustice. "They thought they could bury me," he says during one speech, but freedom always finds a way. The battle against corporate corruption may never truly end, but thanks to Ethan, Clara, and countless others who refuse to give up, the world is waking up. And this time, it won't go back to sleep. Though Ethan is finally free, his journey to reclaim his life proves far more difficult than anyone anticipated. Physically weakened by years of malnutrition and neglect, he spends months in rehabilitation, slowly regaining strength. But the emotional scars run deeper. Haunted by memories of the basement, the cold walls, the muffled voices upstairs, the gnawing hunger, he struggles with insomnia and panic attacks. Simple tasks like walking down a crowded street or sitting in a brightly lit room overwhelm him. Every knock at the door sends his heart racing. Every unfamiliar face feels like a potential threat. Ethan's mistrust of others grows as well. Decades of isolation have left him unsure how to connect with people. He flinches at unexpected touches, avoids eye contact, and keeps conversations brief. Friends and therapists try to help, but progress is slow. For Ethan, freedom doesn't feel like liberation. It feels fragile, uncertain, and tinged with fear. Despite his struggles, Ethan becomes an unlikely symbol of resilience. His story captures the nation's attention, inspiring countless individuals who have faced adversity. Journalists write profiles calling him the boy who exposed a conspiracy, while activists hail him as proof that even in the darkest places, courage can shine through. Ethan begins attending support groups for survivors of abuse and trauma, finding solace in shared experiences. At first, he sits quietly in the corner, listening more than speaking. Over time, though, he starts opening up, sharing snippets of his story and offering words of encouragement to others. His presence alone reminds them that survival is possible, no matter how bleak things seem. It's not about forgetting what happened, he tells one group during a particularly raw session. It's about deciding you won't let it define you. His quiet determination resonates deeply, turning him into a beacon of hope for those still fighting their own battles. Yet Ethan's story also serves as a stark cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked greed and the lengths to which people will go to protect their secrets. Schools, universities, and community organizations invite him to speak about his experiences, using his testimony to spark discussions about ethics, accountability, and systemic corruption. During one speech, Ethan recounts the moment he discovered the incriminating files in the attic. "I was just a kid," he says, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "But I saw enough to know something was wrong. And when I did, they didn't hesitate. They locked me away." He pauses, looking out at the audience. "They thought silencing me would make everything go away. But the truth always finds a way out. Always." His message strikes a chord, prompting calls for greater transparency and protections for whistleblowers. Lawmakers cite his case when introducing new anti-corruption measures, vowing to ensure no child or adult ever suffers as he did. As months pass, Ethan begins carving out a new identity for himself. He moves to a quiet coastal town, where anonymity allows him to heal without constant reminders of his past. He takes long walks along the beach, letting the rhythm of the waves soothe his restless mind. Slowly, he starts rebuilding his life piece by piece. Volunteering becomes a cornerstone of his recovery. Ethan spends hours helping at a local shelter, assisting families displaced by corporate greed, ironically, victims of the same system that once imprisoned him. He finds purpose in giving back, channeling his pain into action. Though he still wrestles with trust issues and lingering trauma, Ethan refuses to let his past dictate his future. In interviews, he acknowledges the difficulty of moving forward, but insists on remaining hopeful. "They took 12 years from me," he says in one interview, "but they didn't take everything. I'm learning how to live again, and maybe someday I'll forgive myself for surviving." Years later, Ethan's story continues to inspire change. Books are written about his ordeal, documentaries explore the broader conspiracy, and memorials honor those harmed by corporate greed. Activists credit him with sparking a movement toward accountability, while survivors see him as proof that healing, however painful, is possible. For Ethan, life remains a delicate balance between honoring his past and embracing his future. On quiet evenings, he sits by the ocean, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Behind him lies a childhood stolen. Ahead, a world slowly waking up to the need for justice. And somewhere, in boardrooms, courtrooms, and communities across the nation, the echoes of his courage continue to ripple outward, reminding everyone who hears his story that truth, resilience, and hope can overcome even the darkest shadows. Clara stares at the map, her mind racing. She thinks back to Ethan's testimony about overhearing his father discuss plans beyond Maplewood. Was this the more secure location he mentioned, or something even bigger? The question hangs unanswered as the camera pulls away, leaving her alone with the ominous markings on the table, and the weight of a battle she knows has only just begun.